didn't plan for this. Honestly, I didn't. Had I known that 3 of the 4 movies I was covering this Halloween as part of Knockoff Movie Month had all been repackaged and distributed by the same company, I'd have probably tried to find one more Lighthouse DVD title and just made it Lighthouse DVD Month. I'll let you make your own Lighthouse were a beacon of shit jokes here. But the reality is, Lighthouse were dissolved in 2016, and seemingly from their inception right the way up to their destruction, they seem to have a real knack of taking less than stellar movies and just making bollocks up to try and shift copies. It's not so much clever marketing, more outright blatant lying. But today's film, 2006's Halloween Night, while clearly tying itself via marketing to the Halloween franchise, is arguably probably the closest we've seen in this run to a movie that actually kinda sorta has some reference points to the Halloween franchise. And it's a pretty early release from The Asylum. And it's the first Asylum film we've ever covered on the channel. Honestly, I've never been too into Asylum films. I'm a firm believer that truly entertainingly awful films have to come from the somewhat deluded belief that your film is going to be a masterpiece, even if the filmmaker is totally devoid of talent. Self-awareness kills these kinds of films, so a studio that's entire operation is purposefully to shovel out half-arsed, low-budgeted films where the aim isn't to make something good, but rather something that'll shift copies through sensationalism while strangling truly weird and wonderful experimentation in the crib? Yeah, that's not really my happening. Not to slam anyone who digs those movies, they're just generally not for me. It'd appear that Asylum gradually shifted to this sensationalist model though, as a brief look at their early work from 1999 to 2005 shows that, to begin with, they were actually pretty grounded. The plot of Halloween Night is allegedly based on real-life events. In the DVD extras, they clarify that the plot for this film was based on an event that happened to one of the crew. Now, unfortunately, this film right out of the gate has one massive problem, and that's that they bring in approximately 2 million characters in the opening and then don't introduce them properly, meaning that their names are all scattered across the whole film's runtime, and due to audio issues on my DVD release of this, combined with some of the characters only getting name-checked once, it's been quite difficult to keep track of things. So, rather than having to rewatch the film multiple times and then painstakingly link actors based on headshots alone on IMDb to their character names, I'm running with pseudonyms on this one, because why the hell not? If the film didn't care that much about naming the characters up front, I don't think anyone should care if I give them made-up names for this. The only name I do know is the killer in this movie, Christopher Vale. The movie opens with a flashback to Christopher as a child witnessing his mother getting sexually assaulted and murdered, followed immediately by his father's suicide. Chris witnesses the whole thing and then emerges from his hiding place to release some kind of chemical into the air which kills the intruders but then horribly burns him in the process. The film then jumps forward 10 years and it's revealed that Christopher's been in an asylum ever since. While doing their rounds, he manages to viciously murder an orderly before escaping the asylum. It's here that we're then introduced to a wave of teenagers who've rented a house in the woods. Each year, a chap I'm choosing to call King Rollo puts on a lavish Halloween party, and this year they've rented a space to do a medieval-themed gathering. Along for the ride is King Rollo's Mrs. Rosalina, Shaggy, Shaggy's top babe, Lewis from Revenge of the Nerds, and a secret lesbian couple. They've turned up to help set things up, but unbeknownst to them, King Rollo has ulterior motives. He's invited a character I'm gonna call arsehole to the party without telling anyone else, with the plan being to have him break into the party, threaten everyone with a gun before abducting Shaggy, with the big gag being that while the partygoers think the Halloween theme is Ren Fair, it's actually psychological horror. Things start to go wrong quite quickly, however, as a police blockade is set up just down the road from the house, meaning getting in and out of the party is awkward due to mandatory police searches and helicopters buzzing all over the place. Shaggy and his missus get stopped by the police, and they panic because Shaggy is going to the party as an executioner, and because he's obsessed with getting a very accurate costume, he went so far as to illegally import actual weapons from out of state that are in the back of his car. Luckily, the police just want to know if the pair have seen Christopher, and after showing them a picture, they head on their way. But not before pulling up just after the blockade at a petrol station to fill up. The pair find the petrol stations completely abandoned, and Shaggy decides to use the opportunity to change into his costume. Unbeknownst to him though, Christopher's hiding in the petrol station toilets, and using some kind of weird ritualistic carving knife, he takes Shaggy out and steals his costume. Now vaguely disguised, he heads back to the car, fails to drive because, he's never done it before, and butchers Shaggy's missus, before barely spluttering off in their car and heading up to the teens' party house. After some rather dramatic introductions, the party gets formally opened and drunken revellers pile in. After a while, King Rollo and the arsehole put their plan in motion. The arsehole enters the party, awkwardly tries to mingle with some of the partygoers, including a very awkward sequence where he tries to aggressively hit on one half of the lesbian couple, both of whom tell him, quite rightly, to fuck off and keep fucking off until he's not fucking there anymore. At which point Christopher enters the party and King Rollo and the arsehole have a play fight. Arsehole pulls a gun out and eventually takes Christopher hostage, who he thinks is Shaggy, before fleeing the house just as a fake police officer who's in with King Rollo turns up to try and assess the situation. With people literally in tears, King Rollo decides that his prank probably wasn't his best move and comes clean with the best line in the entire film.
The real theme was psychological horror, not medieval decadence.
Everyone kicks off at King Rollo and the whole party falls apart. The real police turn up, find out they've had their time wasted and threaten to arrest everyone there if they don't all clear out ASAP. While this is going on, however, we then cut back to Arsehole, who pulls up and chats with Christopher about how cool the prank went, bro. Christopher kills the arsehole and the fake cop before heading back to the house to start murdering again, leading into our third act, an explosive finale where, yep, they do that scene where one of the last survivors wanders around the house and finds all their dead friends one by one just to kill time. In a film that just about tries, will we ever get to the bottom of Christopher's past? Will the cops find him in time? And will the teens make it through to the end of Halloween Night? From a script perspective, what we have here is, well, actually not too bad. Don't get me wrong, this thing isn't defining the slasher genre for the mid-2000s by any stretch of the imagination, but what we have here at its core is just a quite reasonably executed, if not fairly generic, slasher flick. It's professionally paced, there's a clean 3-act structure here with nice clean transition shifts between the acts to get you from plot point to plot point. The first act is particularly nice and nippy, moving at a more than reasonable pace and keeping things nice and interesting from the opening roll right the way through to when the party is set to start. It's not perfect, mind. As mentioned earlier, they have real problems with overstuffing on characters. There's just way too many, which makes it really hard to get a read on any of them. And because they don't really bother to name the characters consistently and up front, preferring instead to name drop across the first and second acts, it makes it super difficult to really get invested in these people when you don't really even know who they are for the first 45 to 65 minutes. Because there's so many characters, it does mean that some disappear for a decent chunk of the opening act or are relegated to doing very minor menial tasks in the background, because the film doesn't really have a lot for them to do and it's way too preoccupied trying to set up the main thrust of the story to deal with characters who really don't need to be in the film until the end of the second act. I feel like they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, honestly. If they'd had less characters, it'd make the script tighter, but the party itself would be super unattended, which would have had a knock-on effect in the second and third acts, making it look sparse and cheap due to the lack of extras. It'd also make the final act slasher ramp-up a bit of a non-event, but including the additional cast has led to a whole lot of not really knowing what to do with them. So, while I'm not entirely happy with the situation, I can at least appreciate that it was something of a lose-lose situation. While the first act is pretty solid and really does get the job done, the second act unfortunately bloats to a beyond uncomfortable level as we spend way too much time just kind of mooching about at the party. And I know it's supposed to be scene and tone setting, but here it gets painful. The key events of the second act realistically could have been handled in about 10 to 15 minutes here, but instead it's nearly double that. Meaning we have to spend an ungodly amount of time just watching people dance about, weird small talk between the guy playing the stair troll and people wanting to get into the party, and shots of Christopher mooching about the party but not really doing anything. I genuinely started to think that the film was a lost cause at one point because it had slowed down so much. I can't exactly say it's padded because it is busy trying to tie all its elements together, but I just feel like it could have done this much quicker and more concisely. When the film finally made it to the third act, I had low expectations, but while it didn't manage to get back to the speedy highs achieved in the opening act, it did at least manage to pick up the pace and end things pretty concisely. Again, it wasn't perfect, but given that some of the movies I've covered this month barely bothered with act changes and tonal shifts, it's surprisingly nice to deal with a film that's pretty much just a decent stab at making an okay and somewhat solid slasher film. What I will say is that this film borrows a lot from other horror movies. For starters, you have elements of the original Halloween, Halloween 2, Halloween 4 and Halloween Resurrection. No, seriously. Alongside nods to Black Christmas, Friday the 13th and I Know What You Did Last Summer. In a frankly bizarre turn of events, they also appear to have paid a scene forward into the Halloween franchise, with the scene where Christopher kills Shaggy in the gas station and then suits up, eerily mirroring a scene in Halloween 2018 where literally the exact same thing happens. I appreciate that it could be argued that the gas station scene here is more likely an homage to the gas station scene from Halloween 4, but I think it's so much more entertaining to think that the producers of Halloween 2018 just watched a load of Halloween knockoffs and cherry-picked the best bits into their movie. While these liberations are expected, they do somewhat lower my opinions on this thing a bit because it's not great to just steal random good scenes from other movies and put them in your movie, even if, quite often, they're some of the best bits of this film altogether. Outside of its thieving, the film pretty much hits every single slasher trope going. You get the "I'll be right back," the scene where one of the guests mistakes the killer for someone else, the scene where the cops turn up and don't take the kids seriously. It's a free-for-all, honestly. Some horror fans like the tropes. I can take them or leave them personally, but the fact that this film tries to cram so many of them into the hour and 25 runtime does get a little bit tiresome by the third act. The dialogue's probably the weakest element of the script in here. They've gone for that slightly snarky Gen X style of fast-paced chatter-type dialogue that was probably best utilised in Scream. It's just long, almost monologue-y type lines that have to be read really fast and sharp, because if they don't get read that way, they make literally no sense and don't sound anywhere near as charismatic. The dialogue feels like an imitation of the Scream style of writing. Throw in some very dated language, early to mid-2000s homophobia and mild racism ahoy, and the result is a movie that swings wildly from being just about tolerable to pretty insufferable and almost inaudible in places. The script was written by Michael Gingold and David Michael Latt. David has 15 writing credits, his last in 2020, and I'd say this was probably his best known writing credit. But really, he's more of a producer, and in a move that may well make Roger Corman shit his pants, David has nearly 290 production credits at the time of writing, which is just wild. I mean, to put that into perspective, as of 2022, Latt is 56 years old and has 287 production credits. By the time Roger Corman was 56 years old, he'd only managed 195. Which is just insane, and he's still going, with several projects still in active development and no sign of slowing down. I fully expect him to potentially catch up to, if not blow clean past Corman's production credits fairly soon. The film was also written by Michael Gingold. He has 5 writing credits and he's more of a director than a writer, with 30 credits under his belt. This was his last writing credit, and I'd be inclined to say that I think this is probably his most recognised written work. On directing duties, we have Mark Atkins. Mark has 24 directing credits, and this was only his 3rd ever directing gig. His works include Six-Headed Shark Attack and Android Cop. While his last directing credit was in 2019, he's a keen cinematographer, with 56 credits under his belt. On the direction front, we have a good, solid attempt here. Atkins has delivered a film that, while probably not the most original piece visually, does have a level of distinction about it that, for the time, would have just about set it above its lower budgeted slasher peers. This is one of those Halloween movies that utilises warm colours throughout to help almost subconsciously remind the audience that this movie is taking place at Halloween, with plenty of oranges and reds on display throughout and a grade that eases slightly towards the warmer end of the spectrum. These choices contrast nicely against the flashback sequences, which are instead manipulated to have a cooler look and feel, presumably to emphasise the passage of time, which I thought looked quite nice. While there are key moments that have strong visual definition in the opening act, around the time we get to that bloated second act, the direction also kinda settles into things a bit, as we end up with more traditional sequences that frequently feel like gun for hire going through the motions, which is a shame after so much effort went into that first half an hour. I'd say with Atkins at the helm, this does have some potential, even if it does skirt mediocrity from time to time. Direction of the cast is perfectly serviceable too, no complaints from me. I feel like Mark was able to work with the cast to deliver something reasonable, though I think he maybe struggled a bit in places to pull the right kind of emotions and feelings from the cast. The physical presence is good, and it's clear to see a lot of time went into the choreography of some of these sequences. But while that physicality is nicely handled, emotionally, I'd say it was a bit of a swing and a miss. From a cine perspective, we do alright as well. There's a not unreasonable amount of experimentation on display, which I always like to see in my horror movies. But I do rather feel that in places they are over-egging things a bit. Compositions of shots, for the most part, are pretty solid and help convey the plot of the film in a more than decent manner, and for the most part, sequences are passably constructed. My big issue with these sequences is that they've just tried to cram way too much into them shot-wise. At times it can be a bit disorienting and distracting rather than what the actual aim of fast cine should be, which is panic-inducing and claustrophobic. For years now I've said that a good horror sequence works on a slow boil principle. You start with longer, slower cuts in your early sequences, establishing the setup to your audience. Then, as things start to get a bit uneasy and spooky, you cut more frequently and begin to ramp up, introducing more experimentation, before finally, when the horror of whatever is the big spooky is on screen, your cuts need to go into overdrive while keeping consistent and purposeful. It's no good just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at a sequence and hoping the disorientation will carry the horror. The best sequences craft what the audience see and choose their cuts carefully. Halloween Night unfortunately goes for the everything in the kitchen sink approach, resulting in breakneck sequences that really don't give the audience time to breathe or even process what they're seeing. It can make some scenes confusing, and I actually kind of began to dislike just how scattershot it was getting. Even in the bloated sections, the cine is just all over the place and really pulls you out of the story. Given that the editing was also done by David Michael Latt, I think either editing isn't his strongest suit, or he just didn't care and wanted it out the door from the looks of things. Performance-wise, we have our weakest overall element. The cast aren't objectively bad, their physical performances are great in places here, but there's just something going on with their actual line delivery that's just really awkward and weird. Most of the cast mumble their way through their lines, some to the point of incoherence, and they all really just feel like they weren't confident in their delivery. For low-budget horror, this is positively passable in context, but I didn't really get on with it personally. I just found it way too stilted. In a move that actually surprised me, the film does dally a little bit into comedy horror. There was more than decent scope for them to lean into that with the performances to deliver something maybe a little bit next level, but they totally missed the ball and just blast through those scenes completely flat, which, to my broken brain, actually ended up making it funnier. But to a broader audience, it would most likely just come across as a cast just not giving a crap about the gig they'd signed up to. While a lot of these performances do feel a bit like they're only there for the paycheck, I will give notable mention to Scott Neri as the killer Christopher Vale. While he gives an almost entirely mute performance, his physical acting in this is above and beyond the rest of the cast, giving a genuinely animated performance that works a more than decent range. He gives the character an intimidating edge, but is aware enough in his performance to give the character a decent emotional undercurrent, and even the odd bit of physical comedy. I think he does a really solid job, and I'd have to commend him for bringing the character, no matter how generic, to life quite effectively. And finally, the soundtrack. And it's not too bad. Again, we're not talking award-winning, it borders on the stocky side of things in places, but they use effective sound cues throughout the film to really emphasise the horror elements, while also giving life to the party scenes and the more thriller-driven moments. It's a decent enough score that takes a step above the standard cheap MIDI fodder that a lot of these movies seem to pull from. What I will flag up though is the on-set audio, which was far from ideal. The cast were already giving mumbly performances, and there were at least half a dozen scenes I saw where they either didn't quite get the mic placement right or had to do some off-site ADR work. But when the audio is bad, it's almost inaudible, which was quite a disappointment. Halloween Night was released on DVD in 2006 by Lighthouse DVD Distribution, which surprised me as, given this as an Asylum film, I'd have figured they'd maybe handle their own distribution on this one as they've done in the States. Rather oxymoronically, the version released in the UK is touted as the unrated director's cut, whilst also having a great big 18 certificate in multiple places across the box. There's a good lot of extras on this release too. Not only do you get an audio commentary and a handful of trailers for other movies that Lighthouse distribute, but you also get deleted scenes, bloopers, a brief interview with David Michael Latt, and the option to watch the movie in both a 2.0 and a 5.1 surround mix, which blows most of the movies I've covered this month clean out of the water. Other than that, this movie hasn't had a Blu-ray release and is currently out of print, but it's dirt cheap to pick up online, and honestly, I think giving this film a Blu-ray release and a proper making-of documentary might just give it enough of a facelift to make it actually worth picking up. The DVD version is watchable, but it's got heavy compression on it that doesn't let you see the detail that the picture really has. If they could present it in widescreen, re-encode it and clean up the extras, even better. So here's hoping for an upgrade in the near future. Halloween Night is probably the only example I've found during this run of knockoff movies where the film was created from the ground up to be a cash-in before the release of a movie tied to the franchise. A short time after this film was released, the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween would hit the screens, and it can't be ignored that it feels like the Asylum wanted to get in early to try and nab a piece of that pie. While I can't say I'm absolutely in love with this film, I did come away from it feeling better about it than when I went in. With a script that left mixed to positive feelings combined with reasonable enough direction and a passable score, I think there's almost certainly something for slasher fans to enjoy with this one. Broader horror fans may be put off by the unfocused Cine editing, the way less than stellar performances, and the fact that this thing is now starting to show its age a bit. But I'd say if you want a hit of that sweet low-budget mid-2000s horror, and you've seen the main hitters, give this a shot. It's not perfect, but then that's the Asylum all over, I guess. And with that, I want to wish you all a very happy and safe Halloween. Take care, and till next time.